Hello friends, this is a new video about disturbing stories from Reddit. Before you start watching, I would like to ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. So, I used to work night shift at a fast food restaurant. I left work at 2 a.m. and I was driving home when a man jumped in front of my car, of which I drove a pickup truck. I quickly stopped and he jumped in the bed immediately and started slamming on the back window frantically while telling me to drive. He seemed panicked. I drove fast and swerved a bit and eventually parked in front of a convenience store. At the time, I always kept a kukri and a metal pipe in my car. I got out with the kukri in hand. I told him to leave while threatening him with the kukri. He begged me to keep driving and I told him to leave again. He ran to the doors of the convenience store, but it was locked as the clerk was in the restroom. Then he got in the back of what seemed to be a taxi in the parking lot and just sat there. Frightened and full of adrenaline, I got in my truck and left. I don't know what was happening, but it seemed like he was running from someone. As an adult, this story doesn't really scare me anymore, but I would be lying if I said it doesn't bug me to this day. Back in 2015, when I was about 10 years old, we had recently moved to a small suburban neighborhood where our new house was being constructed. My father was working in a different country, so my mom, my older sister and I stayed in a rental that was in the same neighborhood until our home was ready. Truth be told, I never really liked the rented house. It wasn't creepy or anything, but it always seemed isolated. Nobody within a 2 or 3 house radius seemed to stay longer than a few months, and it never gave me the homely vibe. Something about the place just rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe I just missed my old neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, we did get adjusted to the house, and I didn't really mind it anymore. Being a duplex, a kitchen, dining room and living room downstairs and 3 bedrooms upstairs. If I yelled for my mom from my bedroom, she wouldn't be able to hear me if she was downstairs. So I was always cautious of being alone in any room. I know, I seem like a paranoid guy, but it was a new house and I watched too many horror movies. Coming to the incident. About 2 months in, during summer vacation, I invited 3 of my close friends for a sleepover. We had fun all day and decided to end the night with a horror movie, Ouija to be specific. We turned off all the lights, drew all the curtains, pulled an old mattress onto the floor and played the movie. My sister and mom had gone to bed an hour ago. If you watch the movie, you would know that in the beginning itself, there is a scene where the sister of the protagonist is home alone when the power goes out and only a single light flickers. A few seconds later, she is possessed by an evil spirit and kills herself. Not exactly the Starry Night of horror films, but hey, we were kids. Now I shit you not, and I can have the other 3 guys attest to this as well. As soon as that scene ended, the power went out, and the whole house turned pitch black at 1 a.m. in the morning. Ooh, scary, right? I bet we could make a movie out of this. Anyways, we found it funny, hilarious actually. Power cuts, although infrequent, were not uncommon in the neighborhood, so guys being guys, we burst out laughing. We tried scaring each other by grabbing at each other's arms in the dark, but not a moment later, our hearts dropped. I still remember that sound, the sound of an old fluorescent light bulb slowly coming to life from behind us. My friends were scared, but I was terrified. I remembered that light bulb. We had a handyman come check it out, and he said that when the entire wiring of the house was redone, they never bothered connecting this bulb back to the circuit. Wasn't really required anymore, so they cut it off, the handyman claimed, before moving on to the next room. And since we were just short-term tenants, we didn't really bother with it either. So there we were, in a pitch-black house with just a single light bulb flickering, just like in the movie. A second passed, and then another one. Noon could move, Noon could speak. It was dead silent. And then finally, we screamed. A scream that ripped through the silence of that night. My mom and sister, bewildered, came racing down the stairs. They were asleep, but they heard us. Our neighbors would have heard us too if we had any. By the time they reached the living room, we were running away, as far away as we could get from the light. I needed to get out, away from that light, away from the house. I lunged at the main door and had just cracked it open when my mom came up from behind and slammed it shut. She was pissed. If my friends weren't there, I would definitely have gotten a smack across the face. It took a while, but the power finally came back. Once my sister managed to calm us down, we went to the dining room and explained everything, to the last detail. My mom just stared back at us, dumbfounded. She did see the light flickering but assumed it was a prank by one of us, boys being boys. The light had never worked before, even when there was power, yet somehow both of them thought we had something to do with the flickering light. After an hour of arguing, we decided to give up and just went back to our rooms to sleep. None of my friends spoke through the night. We were all wide awake but too afraid to speak. After what felt like an eternity, morning came and my friends' parents were back to pick them up. We said our customary goodbyes and they left, leaving me alone, the only person left in the house who knew something was wrong with the house. Days passed, I was still pretty shook up and stopped going to the living room by myself. Eventually, you do learn to move on, but then it happened again. While my sister and I were at the local market, my mom was alone at home when the power went out again, and the light, it came to life again, flickering, just like that day. My mother, being the devout Christian she is, thought it was a miracle. She called it God's light since it provided light within the darkness. She would claim that there was a presence protecting us, but I refused to believe that. My sister too refused to believe that, but that was only because she still thought I had something to do with it. Anyways, over the year, we had our share of power cuts, and every single time that light bulb would come to life in the darkness, and it started from the night I had my sleepover. It started with that very scene in the movie. My friends never came over again, and I knew better than to ask them. Everyone we told brushed it off as a prank, but my mom continued to believe it represented something divine. I knew better. There was something off about that house. Something within it was mocking me every time that light would illuminate. Whatever caused it may not necessarily be evil, but whatever it was, had no business being there. Once the new house was finished, I put the entire incident behind me. Some of the guys from that night would bring it up once in a while, but the conversation would always end in uncomfortable silence. Over the next few years, my friends and I went our separate paths and then finally left for college. I haven't spoken to them in years, but I know that they remember that night. They felt what I felt. I just graduated college a few days ago and was back home when I decided to go for a walk. I came across the old house, the same as it was 10 years ago. It looked like someone was living there, but I wouldn't dare go back inside. I wasn't planning to write this, but I saw a post earlier about haunted houses and it hit me like a punch in the gut. I haven't thought about that summer in years, but now I can't stop. I grew up in a small Bulgarian town, and when we were teenagers, we used to go exploring. Old factories, abandoned schools, that kind of thing. You know, dumb stuff. One of my friends, Miro, said his grandma had this house out in the countryside, a few kilometers from town. Nobody had lived there since his grandpa died. He said we could go there for the weekend. No one will bother us, we can drink and smoke in peace. The moment we saw the place, I got this weird feeling, the kind where your stomach sinks before anything even happens. It was one of those old one-story houses with a broken fence and a yard full of weeds taller than your knees. The windows were covered in grime, and there was this musty smell that hit you as soon as you opened the door. Inside, everything was exactly how someone might have left it 50 years ago. Old wooden furniture, yellowed lace curtains, family photos so faded you couldn't make out the faces. On the wall in the living room was a big round clock. Its hands were stuck at 12. We joked about ghosts at first, like any group of teenage idiots. But after midnight, when the laughter died down and the beer cans emptied, it got quiet. Too quiet. Around 1 a.m., I went outside to take a leak. I remember how bright the moon was. The air was still, almost heavy. I was zipping up when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze. Turned around. Nothing. Just the wind moving through the grass. I went back inside and told Miro someone was walking around the yard. He looked at me dead serious and said, "That's normal. It's just Grandpa. He died here, but he never really left." I laughed at first, waiting for him to crack a smile. He didn't. Before I could even say anything, something thumped from the next room. A heavy sound, like a chair tipping over. We all looked at each other. That room was completely empty. Then came another sound, a slow dragging like wood scraping across the floor. And then, tick. We turned toward the old wall clock. Its second hand, which had been frozen since we got there, started moving. Not forward, not backward, but both. Tick-tock, tock-tick, tick-tock. One of the guys said, "What the hell?" under his breath. The sound filled the room, louder and louder, echoing off the walls like there were 100 clocks ticking out of sync. That's when the lights flickered. No one said a word. We just ran outside. We lit cigarettes with shaking hands. The night felt colder now, like the air itself had changed. Miro lit one extra cigarette and stuck it upright in the dirt. "For Grandpa," he said quietly. We stood there watching it burn. The tip glowed red, then faded, then red again, like someone was taking slow drags. When it burned down to the filter, Miro just stared at the ash. After a while, we decided to go back in. The living room felt different, heavier somehow. The air smelled faintly like smoke, though none of us had smoked inside. And the clock. It was working again. The hands were moving, smoothly. 2:57 a.m. We just stood there, staring. And when the hands reached 3 o'clock exactly, the ticking stopped. That perfect silence. I still remember it. You don't notice how loud silence can be until it feels alive. Miro's face went pale. He just said, "He's gone," and walked outside. We left not long after that. None of us said much on the way home. It's been years, and that house is probably gone now. But sometimes when I'm up late and the world's dead quiet, I swear I can hear that same clock ticking. Tick-tock, tock-tick. I don't believe in ghosts, but I never asked Miro what happened to his grandpa, and I don't plan to. 2 years ago, the night before Halloween, my friend and I went to a park around 11:30 p.m. to carve a pumpkin. The lights were still on, and the park sat right beside a quiet little neighborhood. It felt safe. Before we even got out of the car, a black cat ran across the road. My friend, superstitious as hell, asked if this was a bad idea. I laughed it off. We set up under a pavilion. The woods were about 200 feet away, silent, dense, watching. Then, right after midnight, Halloween now, the lights cut out. Everything went black. Suddenly from the woods, "Hello," robotic, broken, wrong. We didn't move. Then again, "Hello." Closer, I turned to my friend and saw the whites of his eyes glowing in the dark, wide with pure, silent terror. I grabbed his wrist and ran. As we sped out of the parking lot, another black cat darted across the road in front of us. One Sunday afternoon a few years ago, I was in my parents' bedroom, playing a computer game on their laptop. I was kneeling by their bed, right next to the window. The laptop was resting on the bed. After a little while of playing, the shutters opened. However, nobody else was there, and the window was closed. I definitely thought it was super strange, but I just decided to ignore it and keep playing. Well, I kept playing for maybe 10 to 15 more minutes. But then, out of nowhere, the shutters slammed shut. And I mean they slammed shut, loudly. Nobody else was in the room. I was the only person in there. I totally froze. I was paralyzed. I could not move. After I could move again, I left the room in a panicked hurry. I don't think I'll ever know what that was. Several years ago, I, now 35F, used to post funny things on FB that would happen to me on a regular basis at night after kids were in bed. Legit things that you just couldn't make up. One of those things would be along the lines of me being exhausted, young mom of 4 kids all under 7, and seeing reflections of a person in the back door glass and freaking out only to realize I wasn't wearing my glasses and it was my own reflection. Now, around the same time I started posting these funnies, 2014-ish, my husband started a graveyard shift job at a company that was 30 minutes away from our house. One night I was laying in bed, and from a light outside casting a shadow on our wall, I saw what looked like a person walk by our bedroom window. I laid still and stopped breathing to concentrate. Then I saw the same shadow go by again in the opposite direction. I panicked and called my dad, who lives 7 minutes from here, then called the police. Of course, my dad showed up first, brought his firearm and checked the backyard. He came back inside just about the time an officer showed. I told him what I saw and he went out back and checked. While he was checking, I called my husband and he said he was heading home. This was around midnight. Cop comes back in and says he didn't see footprints or anything that looked disturbed or that would suggest someone being back there. I looked at Dad and we thanked him and he left. I told Dad my husband would be home soon and he could go. Husband made it home in 15 minutes. Like I said, it's a 30-minute drive, so he was booking it, and immediately went out back to check. Guess what? He heard noises, a bump against the fence and someone running down the alley. He ran to the fence, yelled things into the darkness I won't repeat, and came in to stay up all night to make sure they didn't return. Shortly after this, he made me purchase a firearm for protection and I immediately stopped posting the funnies. Side note, did you notice how the cop didn't see footprints, but my dad had already been out there and we knew he had left footprints behind, dew had already fallen and prints were easily seen. While we respect our officers and support them, we don't trust a lot of their work or expertise. If my husband hadn't come home that night, my unknown visitor would have stayed, and God knows what would have happened. I haven't shared this before, but it's been on my mind. In high school, a friend's mom was going out of town. She planned on having people over, but for whatever reason it ended up being her, and I having a sleepover. She may have cancelled the party plans to not get in trouble. Regardless, everyone in the small town knew about it. About midnight, we heard scraping sounds coming from the back bedroom. We thought it was friends trying to freak us out. It continued, but we didn't see anything. This went on for a while and we were getting scared. We peeked out and saw this person's head in the large front window. He had a distinctive hairstyle, so we knew who it was. He was a very quiet guy that was always around but seemed out of it. No one really knew his story, but he was always on the fringes of things. We thought he was weird but harmless, so we called the police and they looked around. They found pry marks on the back bedroom window frame. We told them who we saw in the window. Nothing else happened that night, but we were pretty scared. Cut to a few years later. The person that was stalking us that night broke into a house and brutally murdered a woman that lived alone. It was a town tragedy. The family ended up tearing down the house and leaving an empty lot. I'll never forget seeing the shadow of his head in that window. This is an old story, but still scary AF. I was 12, maybe 14. I'm a male that doesn't get spooked easily, even when I was 13. We had just moved to this new house. I loved the outdoors, still do, but this is the story. I couldn't wait to explore the woods behind the house. The first few times I went in, it was fine. Peaceful, fun, just hiking, nothing wrong. But the 9th time I went in, that's when things got real. I saw something walking. I thought it was a deer, but deer have heads. This didn't. I wanted to get a closer look because I was confused. I got within about 20 feet of it when it suddenly ran. I chased it all the way to the edge of the woods. Then it was gone. When I turned around, I saw a man about 20 feet away. A young man. I called out, "Hey, who's there? This is private property." No response. I walked closer, and he faded. He literally turned to dust. I walked over to where he had been standing and found a squirrel, its head cut clean off, like it had been done with a knife, not teeth. My face went cold. I turned, and there they were. 10 feet away from me stood what looked like a clan of ghosts. They were all facing me. One started walking toward me, laughing. I tried to stand my ground. This was my home. I didn't want to be scared of the woods I lived beside, but when I saw that thing coming closer, I just couldn't. I ran. As I was running, something hit me in the face. I looked down. It was a doll, stitched together to look like me. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't stop until I reached the house, and when I turned to shut the door, I saw it again. The deer man thing standing at the edge of the woods watching. Now, whenever I go into those woods, I keep my 12 gauge with me. That's a shotgun for those who don't know. Stay safe. When I was still in school, I would normally take the bus most of the time until I got my license. The bus stop wasn't far from my house at all. It was just a few blocks. There were 2 separate paths that you could take to get there from my house. One was just walking along the road and taking a right, walking down some more road, and then you would be there. The second path was just a straight shot to the stop, but it was through a patch of very thick forest. The first path was maybe like a 15-minute walk, while the second path through the forest was about 10 minutes. I was running late one day and decided to take the path through the forest. It was the start of winter, so it was pitch black outside at the time I had to wake up for high school. I was either a freshman or a sophomore at this time. I started on the path and kept my face pointed forward despite the eagerness to look over my shoulder at every little snap and crack. But just as I saw the bus stop through the trees, I heard a very loud snap. Like a tree had just been ripped apart, it was so loud that it echoed in the fields surrounding the area. I stormed forward, terrified out of my mind. Thankfully there was another kid there, I think his name was John or Jay. We were in the same grade, so I debated bringing up the loud crack, but I didn't want to sound crazy if he somehow didn't hear it. But he beat me to it and said, "Dude, what the hell was that? Did you hear that?" Mind you, it was still pitch black out and we could barely see each other standing like 2 feet apart. I didn't know him very well since he was newer to our school. I didn't really want to bring much attention to it, thinking that if it was something supernatural, we should just ignore it. So I simply nodded, and he picked up on my unwillingness to talk about it, and he also just nodded. I was standing way closer than I normally would, since I'm incredibly awkward, so I would just stand on the opposite side as everyone else. But this was a special exception, so I just stood a couple feet away, seeking just a semblance of comfort from what had just occurred. He went on his phone and so did I, but I felt like something was watching me, not behind me but in front of me. I just moved my eyes to look, keeping my head down, and saw a figure dash into view about 13 feet away. It looked like a deer, which is very common where I'm from, so I just ignored it until I felt so uneasy that I had to take another glance. It stood up. I looked over to the other kid, hoping that he had also been seeing that, but he was glued to his phone. I looked back, and at the same time, whatever the hell that was looked at me. It was still dark as night out, so I couldn't make out any facial features, just a shadow. It looked back, and then got back down on all fours and ran so incredibly quick that it was just a blur. It ran back into the field that was behind it, and not a minute later the bus pulled up. I walked onto the bus first, and the kid sat behind me, and before he sat down said, "That was crazy." It was the most serious I had ever heard him, so I know he at least caught a glimpse of whatever that thing was. Does anyone know what it could have been? It still haunts me to this day.